Yes, everyone, welcome back to flatcapeurotalk here. And this one, I'm going to be talking about a manager that I think is maybe in some trouble, or kind of with the benefit of hindsight, you could say, I think is maybe in some trouble and is going to need to take a look at himself if he wants a future in his if he wants a managerial future. And it is going to be Scott Parker, one of Spurs' former players, somebody that a lot of people I think do have a soft spot for, of course. I think he did a great job for us when at the club, but he hasn't exactly impressed me too much as a manager. And I think actually some of his quotes, maybe that have come out kind of since his departure over at Bournemouth, I think really do reflect that perhaps Scott Parker maybe is a bit in over his head, or is maybe has too much of an inflated ego of himself. But we'll get straight into it, everybody. But before we do smash that like button, and hopefully you do enjoy this one. We're going to look at some of the quotes. This one came from a great article from Jack Tanner from the Daily Echo, everybody. I'm going to take a look at his Fulham kind of quotes here, and it really mostly has to do with recruitment when it comes to Scott Parker, something that he really likes to sort of complain about, you could say. When asked about Fulham recruitment and kind of the up and down nature of Fulham in maybe years, he said, "We've fallen short at this level. There's no denying that. That's hence why we're relegated. We need to work out what we need to do to improve that." I'm not just talking about the players in the team. I'm talking about us as a football team. We're on a roller coaster, relegation, promotion, then relegation again. We need to make some big decisions. We need to understand where we need to get to and what we need to do. My players have given me absolutely everything. We've fallen short on quality at times. We need to have some discussions, and everyone will at the football club sit down and work out what we need to do going forward and get off this roller coaster that we're on at the moment. We're going through the same cycle. What is key is that we break that cycle. Already kind of alluding to maybe the lack of quality, you could say, Scott Parker and his team did. And I think there is kind of really not a lot behind that, because I actually thought that Fulham side had a fair few decent players, you could say, into it. And so now we're going to kind of take a look at maybe what sort of his side in particular had maybe versus Marco Silva's side, just to maybe kind of prove a point here. These are kind of all of Scott Parker signings over to the left here. The likes of Anthony Knockaert, you can see Josh Maja, and these are basically just a full 11 of signings that Fulham have made. Obviously, this isn't kind of their preferred 11 for Marco Silva or for the likes of Scott Parker when they were there respectively, but these are kind of just all the signings that you could put on paper, and if you were to kind of put them in positions, this is what you could have. And I mean, Scott Parker was given a fair few amount of signings, especially pretty good loan signings, and some of them were like potential loan transfer signings. He got Josh Maja, of course, the former Sunderland player, and one thing that's to be said about that transfer is that was because he really wasn't happy with Mitrovic, whereas someone like Marco Silva has made Mitrovic work and has gotten the best out of him. I think Scott Parker just, I guess, decided not to work with the guy, and I think that was obviously his own mistake, and he had to sort of pay the price for it. He went with Anthony Knockaert, Josh Maja, two both failed signings, absolutely, but still he got the recruitment there. Anthony Robinson has been a solid left back for them, and he came into the side. Mario Lamina, Harrison Reed, Ruben Loftus-Cheek, he got that season. I think Harrison Reed was on loan maybe the previous season or something, but he was sort of quote unquote maybe more of a newer signing that Scott Parker was able to inherit. Kenny Tete was a new signing from Olympique Lyon alongside Joachim Andersen. Two great signings for them, and players that were actually brilliant for them, I thought, that season, and he definitely shouldn't have complained about those. Adarabayo has been a decent player for them. They had Alphonse Areola, who certainly is a great keeper if you ask me. Then I believe they had Terence Kongalo as some sort of makeshift left back or left-sided center back. You kind of compare it to Marco Silva. Marco Silva certainly was given a lot of reinforcements up front with the likes of Carlos Vinicius, Dan James, Mano Solomon, and Willian. But you really do look at the fact that I feel like there is maybe similar recruitment here on both scales. I think when it comes to the defense, I think it's actually quite the same. I think he actually got a better goalkeeper, the likes of Scott Parker. I actually do rate Tosin Adarabioyo. I think getting the likes of Shane Duffy and Issa Diop for Marco Silva certainly wasn't enough when you look at it, hence why he's kind of stuck with the likes of Tim Ream and Issa Diop or Adarabioyo, but he didn't get enough recruitment as you probably thought Scott Parker did. Scott Parker got basically two or three center backs, I think, or at least almost four center backs if you basically count Kenny Tete as well. When you look in the midfield, sort of similar recruitment. I think better recruitment done this time by the looks of Fulham, because Joao Palhinha was an absolute Brilliant signing. But, I mean, that Scott Parker team, they had Zambo and Gisa, who's a brilliant player for them. Look at how good he's been over at Napoli. Ruben Loftus-Cheek is obviously playing a lot better now. Harrison Reed, Mario Lemina, he did get a lot of midfield reinforcements, as where Marco Silva, you could say, where he might have done better in the transfer window is maybe just getting more attacking reinforcements. But he did make use of Mitrovic, whereas someone like Scott Parker didn't make use of Mitrovic, which I think is kind of his own fault and his own mistake, and he had to pay the price for it. But those are kind of some of the initial sort of kind of maybe comparisons that you could show about maybe why Scott Parker was probably a bit too naive, or maybe a bit too ignorant, or even just a bit too full of himself, you could say, to kind of put down the Fulham board, to kind of put down the recruitment, because you see an example of what Marco Silva has been able to do with virtually the same squad and also virtually similar recruitment, and how much better he's made this team look. Ever since I think Scott Parker has left the side of Fulham, they have looked a lot better under Marco Silva, so he's kind of proven wrong there, maybe even a bit embarrassed is what you could say from it. But we're going to kind of scroll down here and take a look at maybe some of his quotes when, kind of leaving Bournemouth, or kind of his quotes while at Bournemouth. After defeat to Bristol City in pre-season, Parker stated, "We lost 8 players at the end of last season and we brought in only 2. You'd say that at this moment in time we are a weaker squad and a weaker team than what we were back at the end of last season." After being compared to Forest's transfer window and the differing situations at both clubs, Parker did respond saying, "It's just the polar opposite to where we are, really. It's a club that have obviously got promoted and invested a huge amount of money in terms of strengthening, in terms of going up to the next level, which is the Premier League. They've tried to do that with signing players. They felt the need to do that. We're not in that market. Us as a football club are not in a position to be able to do that, really. Them and us, it's chalk and cheese." And you kind of look at now where kind of Bournemouth are sort of in the league table versus like the Forest. You look at maybe how that sort of recruitment for Forest ended up maybe make things a bit more complicated, made things a bit more confusing, maybe a bit more hectic, you could say, for the likes of Steve Cooper and Scott Parker. I don't know, obviously he needed maybe more recruitment, but at the same time, I think he was doing it a bit sort of kind of childishly, or petulantly is maybe the word. I'm not sure, but he was maybe just sort of making too big of a comparison between himself and Forest. And I think with the benefit of hindsight now, you sort of look at Forest's situation and you look at Bournemouth's situation, it doesn't exactly prove that if you sign 20 players to a newly promoted team, whether that actually works or not. And I think that's what sort of Scott Parker was basically asking for. He asked for more players, he asked for more quality. He was given quality, he was given players. He was given Tavernier, he was given the likes of Senesi, he was given the likes of Neto as goalkeeper. Of course, he probably needed more than that, but it just shows that he wanted maybe that Forest situation. He probably wished he were in Steve Cooper's boat. Maybe he wished he was in that position. And now when you look at it with the benefit of hindsight, it's not really actually the grass is greener sort of situation. But after bringing in Tavernier and Senesi and Neto, Parker stressed that they still needed more help prior to his 9-0 thumping to Liverpool. He said, "We need bodies through the door for sure. We need help in that, and to evolve as a team and as a football club, certainly that is the case." Again, now we sit in this position. Obviously, days are going by, and that has been tricky for many reasons and for many circumstances. So I'm hoping that we're hoping everyone's trying to bring players in. But like I said, there's many obstacles we're facing at this present moment in time. So hopefully we can do that. So after bringing in players, after the board sort of giving in to Scott Parker, he continued to complain and continued to ask for more players. And I think this ended up probably being kind of maybe the end of him, because there were kind of so many soundings out by Scott Parker, kind of so many complainings, so many sort of kind of public sort of maybe signs of just discontent, that Bournemouth, I think, were right in sort of stressing in their sort of, I think, statement of, sacking him, that he was a bit disrespectful to the club and he wasn't exactly representing the, agreements that they had made previously between himself and the owner. And I kind of do agree even with Simon Jordan sort of about how there really aren't that many situations, I think, in modern football where the manager and the owner don't have somewhat of an agreement or somewhat of an understanding of how much money there is, how much they'll spend, where they'll spend it, etc. I think it's very rare these days that there's just complete no communication or no lack of an idea of what each other is coming from or where each other is coming from. And so I do find it kind of a bit sort of, disingenuous of Scott Parker to kind of, just throw the board under the bus in kind of the attempt of saving his own, it seems like. But That's sort of kind of my thoughts on it. And so, speaking after the 9-0 thumping, Parker did say against the likes of Liverpool, but at this moment in time where we currently are, I can see some more, to be honest with you, basically alluding to, I can see some more 9-0 thumpings coming in, which is a very sort of cowardly and very kind of a defeatist approach, if you ask me. He said, so we need to make a decision. That's just where it is. I think I've been clear on that from the minute I stepped in. I've been clear throughout all of that in terms of how this season could look for us, these experiences, what we're going to face, what they may look like, and I stick by that. That's exactly what it will look like. We need to make a decision and try to help this group, this young group, who at times are struggling for air. Every one of us, me, my staff, the fans, we need to make that decision. So basically, he's just alluding to these 9-0 thumpings will continue to happen and continue to occur, and sort of just taking a very defeatist approach and basically not taking any responsibility himself and sort of laying it on the board. And I just think, again, it's just sort of a bit defeatist, a bit ignorant, not really acknowledging any sort of blame himself. And so when I do kind of maybe take a look at sort of the records between kind of the two sides, or sorry, the two managers when he was over at Bournemouth, and then with the new kind of change in manager, you can kind of see the two differences in the record, and maybe just sort of suggest that perhaps Scott Parker was speaking too soon. Perhaps actually he's not even that good of a manager. You see his record here; he was losing the majority of his preseason games, which isn't a great way to start. Then he goes in Bournemouth versus Villa. Gets a great 2-0 win, ends up kind of coming into a really tough run of fixtures here. Does get his win against Norwich, which is a big win there, but ends up kind of getting some smackings. And pretty much during this whole time period, he is kind of voicing some complaints, and he is basically alluding to the lack of investment from the board, which we discussed in those quotes earlier. And I just think if he had maybe not spoken so outwardly, if he maybe had not spoken so ill of his board, maybe he would have stuck in the job a bit longer. Maybe he would have been given more of a chance. And you see the record after he got sacked. They were able to pick up a point here, able to pick up 3 points here. Very, very important 1 point here against Newcastle. Very impressive. Brentford, Leicester City. They end up turning into one of the most informed teams in the Premier League, and talk about a managerial bounce back and continuing to pick up points. Now, maybe after 2 defeats in a row, and potentially a third after facing Spurs, they'll be back in maybe a sort of a relegation fight. But it sort of just shows, I think, just if maybe Scott Parker hadn't opened his mouth too soon, if maybe he didn't complain too much about the board and didn't really go behind their back, I think he'd still be in a job. And I think he'd probably still find himself with this Bournemouth side and maybe getting the praise that he probably thinks he deserves for trying to help them survive. But I think he opened his mouth too soon. And I think he also just maybe is being shown to not really be that great of a manager, because ultimately everybody, when you really do look at it, the likes of Fulham have gotten better since Scott Parker has left, and the likes of Bournemouth have gotten better since Scott Parker has left. Also, the investment hasn't changed since Bournemouth. That their manager there is using the same players that he had to use over at Bournemouth, over at Fulham as well. In the case of Marco Silva, virtually using a lot of the same players in some cases that he had to use as well, and just sort of shows that I think he definitely has to take a look at himself. Scott Parker has to take a look at his tactics and just simply has to take a look at himself as a manager, and maybe instead of just constantly deflecting blame, maybe actually take a bit of the blame himself. So that's kind of my thoughts on sort of Scott Parker and his future. A bit rambly, not very organized, I do understand, but I'm just trying to get the videos out there as quick as I can for you guys, and this one was a very fun one to make. So let me know what you think of this one, everybody. Hit that like on your way out, and I will be seeing ya.